November 15th, 1994, Victoria Harbor Studios, Hong Kong. Daniel Chen had choreographed over 200 fight scenes without a single serious injury. Tommy Woo was supposed to land safely on the airbag. Instead, he hit the concrete edge and shattered 3 vertebrae. The cameras kept rolling. Daniel kept his mouth shut, and Tommy Woo never walked the same again. March 15th, 2024. Bangkok Film Studios. Jackie Chan had been Wei Ming's closest friend for 28 years. That's exactly why Wei Ming never told him the truth about Elena Vasquez. The wine glass shattered against Jackie's temple during take 47. 300 crew members watched Jackie's reaction. Not anger, not surprise, but recognition, the kind that comes when buried ghosts suddenly breathe again. Wei Ming felt his blood freeze. Only 3 people knew about that wine glass from 1995. 2 were supposed to be dead. Jackie's eyes found Wei Ming across the soundstage. In that moment, 28 years of friendship cracked like ice. Because Jackie's face said what Wei Ming had dreaded hearing since that night in Bangkok. "I know what you did to her." The crew would later say they'd never seen Jackie Chan look afraid, but Wei Ming saw something worse in those eyes. Betrayal, the kind that rewrites history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The soundstage fell into the kind of silence that precedes explosions. Wei Ming's hands trembled as he watched Jackie touch the wine-stained cut on his temple, fingers coming away bloody. The crimson droplets caught the harsh studio lights, and for a moment, Wei Ming was back in 1995, watching different blood pool on different concrete. "Cut!" The director's voice cracked across the set, but nobody moved. 300 pairs of eyes remained fixed on Jackie Chan, waiting for the legend's reaction. The thrown wine glass, a prop that should have missed by inches according to the choreography, had found its mark with surgical precision. Wei Ming forced his legs to move, pushing through the frozen crew toward his oldest friend. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, the weight of 3 decades pressing down on his shoulders. He'd built his career on split-second timing, on knowing exactly where every moving piece would be at any given moment. But this was chaos he couldn't control. "Jackie, I'm sorry. The angle was wrong," Wei Ming began, his voice barely audible. Jackie's head turned slowly, those familiar eyes now harboring something Wei Ming had never seen before. Not the playful spark that had gotten them through countless dangerous stunts, not the determined focus that made Jackie a perfectionist. This was something colder, knowing. Was it? Jackie's voice carried across the silent set. Wrong angle, Wei Ming, or exactly the angle someone intended? The blood drained from Wei Ming's face. Around them, crew members exchanged glances, sensing undercurrents they couldn't understand. This wasn't about a missed mark or a prop malfunction. This felt personal, ancient, poisonous. "Let's get you cleaned up," Wei Ming said, reaching for Jackie's arm. Jackie stepped back. The simple movement might as well have been a slap. In 30 years of death-defying stunts, Jackie had never stepped away from Wei Ming's guidance, never questioned his choreography, never looked at him with suspicion. Who threw it? Jackie's question cut through the air like a blade. Wei Ming's eyes swept the crowd of extras, stunt doubles, and crew members. Faces blurred together under the hot lights. Any one of them could have been the thrower. But Wei Ming knew, somehow, impossibly, that whoever had launched that glass wasn't just making a statement about the present. They were delivering a message from the past. "Security will review the footage," Wei Ming managed. "We'll find out who—" "I know who," Jackie said quietly, but his words carried. "The question is whether you do." The implication hung between them like a live wire. Wei Ming felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same sensation that had plagued him for 28 years whenever Jackie mentioned Bangkok, whenever old photos surfaced, whenever Elena's name almost crossed someone's lips. "Mr. Chan, we should call a medic," interrupted Sarah Chen, the assistant director. Wei Ming's daughter stepped between them with professional efficiency, but he caught the worried glance she threw his way. At 26, Sarah had inherited his eye for detail and his ability to read dangerous situations. Right now, she was reading one. "No need," Jackie said, but his eyes never left Wei Ming's face. "Some wounds run too deep for medics anyway." The crew began to stir, whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through grass. Wei Ming knew he was losing control of the situation, watching his carefully constructed world fracture in real time. For 3 decades he'd been the master of controlled chaos, the man who could orchestrate destruction and ensure everyone walked away unharmed. Now he felt like a spectator at his own demolition. "Places, everyone," Sarah called out, trying to restore order. "We're taking a 15-minute break while we reset the shot." As the crew dispersed, Jackie finally spoke again, his voice low enough that only Wei Ming could hear. Elena Vasquez. The name hit Wei Ming like a physical blow. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in over 2 decades. It belonged to a different time, a different version of himself. Younger, more reckless, willing to make choices that would haunt him forever. Jackie. That was a long time ago. Not long enough. Jackie's hand went to his temple again, where wine still dripped like tears. "She's here, isn't she? Somehow, impossibly, she's here." Wei Ming wanted to laugh, to dismiss the idea as impossible. Elena Vasquez was dead. Had been dead for 28 years. He'd seen the paperwork, signed the documents, watched as every trace of her existence was systematically erased. Dead people don't throw wine glasses. Dead people don't orchestrate perfect recreations of their final moments. But as Wei Ming looked around the Bangkok soundstage, the same studio where Elena had died, the same lighting, the same crushing weight of secrets, he felt the walls of his carefully built reality beginning to crumble. Because somewhere in this crowd of 300 people, someone knew exactly what had happened that night in 1995. Someone who shouldn't exist was very much alive, and they were just getting started. The 15-minute break stretched like a held breath. Wei Ming stood motionless in the center of the soundstage, watching his life's work scatter around him like startled birds. Crew members whispered in tight clusters, their voices creating a low hum that reminded him of mourners at a funeral. His funeral, perhaps. Sarah approached with a damp cloth and the kind of purposeful stride that had made her invaluable as an assistant director. She'd inherited more than just his eye for detail. She had his ability to find order in chaos, to solve problems before they became catastrophes. Watching her navigate the aftermath of the wineglass incident, Wei Ming felt a familiar swell of pride mixed with terror. She was everything good about him, unmarked by his sins, and the thought of his past contaminating her future made his chest constrict. "Dad, what's going on?" Sarah's voice carried the same professional calm she used to direct crowd scenes, but Wei Ming caught the tremor underneath. She dabbed at a wine stain on his shirt with mechanical precision. Jackie looked like he'd seen a ghost. The irony of her words wasn't lost on him. "Just old tensions surfacing," Wei Ming said, accepting the cloth. His fingers brushed hers. When had her hands become so steady while his had started to shake? "This location brings back memories." Sarah's dark eyes searched his face with the intensity she usually reserved for reviewing safety footage. At 26, she possessed a fearlessness that both impressed and terrified him. She'd grown up on film sets, learned to walk among falling glass and controlled explosions, treated danger like a family pet that could be managed with the right precautions. But some dangers couldn't be choreographed away. "Memories of what?" she pressed, and Wei Ming realized his daughter had inherited something else from him, the inability to let mysteries rest unsolved. Before he could answer, the soundstage's massive doors groaned open, letting in a slice of Bangkok's oppressive heat. The afternoon sun cut through the artificial twilight like a blade, and Wei Ming caught the scent of jasmine and exhaust fumes from the street beyond. The smell transported him instantly to 1995, to a younger version of himself drunk on ambition and possibility, before he understood the true cost of keeping secrets. Sarah Wei Ming caught his daughter's wrist gently. "After we wrap today, I want you to stay close to the hotel. Don't go exploring the city alone." Her eyebrows lifted. Sarah Chen had never been told she couldn't handle herself anywhere in the world. She spoke 3 languages, held a black belt in Taekwondo, and had organized stunts in locations from the favelas of Rio to the rooftops of Prague. "Dad, what aren't you telling me?" The question hung between them like a tightrope, and Wei Ming felt the familiar vertigo of standing at the edge of truth. How could he explain that his daughter's entire existence felt suddenly fragile, That the wine glass wasn't just a prop malfunction, but a declaration of war from someone who should be dust and bones. That every person on this set was a potential enemy, including the extras whose faces blurred together an anonymous threat. "Just humor an old man's paranoia," he said finally. Jackie had vanished into his trailer, leaving behind only the metallic smell of spilled wine and the kind of silence that follows revelations. Wei Ming could still see the moment recognition had dawned in his oldest friend's eyes, the way 28 years of carefully maintained denial had cracked like safety glass under pressure. Elena Vasquez. Even thinking the name felt like summoning a demon. The studio's air conditioning hummed with mechanical persistence, but Wei Ming felt sweat gathering at the base of his neck. The soundstage's concrete floor stretched around him like a gray ocean, marked by chalk lines and tape that mapped out camera positions and safety zones. But there were no safety zones from the past, no marked boundaries that could contain what he'd buried here 3 decades ago. Wei Ming. The voice belonged to Michael Torres, the film's director, a young hotshot from Los Angeles who treated every shot like it might win him an Oscar. Michael's face carried the particular strain of someone watching his budget hemorrhage in real time. "We need to talk about tomorrow's sequences. If Jackie's not comfortable with the choreography..." "Jackie's fine," Wei Ming said automatically. It was just a miscommunication. But even as he spoke the words, Wei Ming felt their inadequacy. This wasn't about miscommunication or safety protocols or the dozen other crises that punctuated every film production. This was about a debt he'd thought was buried so deep it would never surface. About choices made in Bangkok's humid darkness that had shaped every day since. Michael nodded uncertainly and drifted away, leaving Wei Ming alone with the weight of his daughter's presence beside him and the growing certainty that someone in this crowd of 300 people was playing a game he didn't understand. Sarah touched his arm. "Dad?" Wei Ming looked down at her upturned face, so trusting, so completely unaware that she'd inherited not just his talent but his enemies, and felt the first real fear he'd experienced in decades. Not the manageable anxiety of coordinating dangerous stunts, but the bone-deep terror of a man who realizes his carefully constructed world is about to collapse. And this time, he might not be able to protect the person he loved most. The first note appeared while Wei Ming was explaining the revised safety protocols to his stunt team. Sarah found it tucked under the windshield wiper of his rented Mercedes, the paper folded with surgical precision into a perfect square. She carried it back to the soundstage absently, her mind still processing the strange tension that had infected the set like a fever. "Someone left this on your car," she said, handing him the note without ceremony. Wei Ming's fingers went numb the moment he touched the paper. The texture was wrong, too thick, too expensive. Like the stationery Elena had always used for her letters, cream-colored paper with a subtle watermark that caught light like a whisper. His hands trembled as he unfolded it, and for a moment the words blurred together into meaningless symbols. Then they sharpened into focus, and Wei Ming's world tilted off its axis. "Did you really think concrete could bury everything? Some flowers grow through cracks. Some girls learn to breathe underwater. Studio 7, midnight. Come Alone, or Sarah learns why her mother never talks about Bangkok." "Eve." The note fluttered from his fingers like a dying bird. Sarah bent to retrieve it, but Wei Ming's hand shot out faster than thought, crushing the paper against the concrete before she could read it. The gesture was so violent, so desperate, that Sarah stepped back instinctively. "Dad, what?" "It's nothing." The lie tasted like ashes in his mouth. "Production notes." But Sarah's eyes had already catalogued everything. His chalk-white complexion, the way his breath came in short bursts, how his usually steady hands shook as he shoved the crumpled paper into his pocket. She'd spent her entire life reading the subtle signs that preceded catastrophe, and right now every signal was screaming danger. "Production notes that mention my mother?" The words hit Wei Ming like physical blows. Of course she'd seen Elena's initials. Sarah missed nothing, inherited hypervigilance that made her excellent at her job and terrible to lie to. He watched his daughter's face cycle through confusion, suspicion, and something that looked like dawning horror. "I heard you say that name earlier. Elena Vasquez." Sarah's voice carried the careful neutrality she used when diffusing volatile situations. "Who is she, Dad?" Wei Ming felt the walls of his carefully constructed reality dissolving like sugar in rain. For 28 years, he'd managed to keep his two worlds separate, the life before Bangkok and the life after, the man who'd made an impossible choice and the father who'd tried to build something clean from the wreckage. Now they were colliding with the force of tectonic plates, and Sarah stood directly in the fault line. Someone from a long time ago, he managed. Someone who died. But you just got a note from her. The simple logic was unanswerable. Wei Ming looked around the soundstage desperately, seeking escape routes that didn't exist. Crew members moved through their tasks with practiced efficiency, completely unaware that the foundations of his world were cracking apart beneath their feet. Jackie remained locked in his trailer, probably drinking himself into the kind of numbness Wei Ming envied. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully." Wei Ming gripped his daughter's shoulders, feeling how small she was beneath his hands, how fragile. "Pack your things tonight. Take the first flight back to Hong Kong." Her eyes widened. "What? Dad, we're in the middle of filming. I can't just—" "This isn't a request." His voice carried the same absolute authority he used to halt dangerous stunts mid-sequence. "Something's happening here that you don't understand. Something that started long before you were born." Sarah shook her head slowly, and Wei Ming recognized his own stubborn streak reflected in her expression. She wouldn't run from danger she couldn't identify, wouldn't abandon her responsibilities based on cryptic warnings. She was too much like him, and that similarity might get her killed. "If you're in some kind of trouble, let me help," Sarah said. "Whatever happened in Bangkok—" "You can't help with this." The words came out harsher than he intended, edged with 28 years of accumulated guilt. "This is about choices I made before you existed. Mistakes that can't be undone." The hurt that flashed across Sarah's features was like watching someone strike his own heart. But better her wounded feelings than her blood on concrete. Better her anger than her silence. The crumpled note seemed to burn in his pocket, its message replaying in his mind like a broken record. Studio 7, midnight. The same studio where Elena had died, where he'd held her lifeless body and made a decision that had poisoned every day since. But Elena was dead, had to be dead. He'd seen the aftermath, signed the papers, watched her existence get systematically erased, unless everything he thought he knew about that night was wrong. Unless someone had been watching from the shadows for 3 decades, planning this moment with infinite patience. Unless his greatest sin was about to demand its final payment, and Sarah was the currency. The hotel lobby felt like a mausoleum at 3 a.m., all marble silence and shadows that stretched too long under amber lights. Wei Ming sat in a leather chair that cost more than most people's cars, staring at his phone and cycling through the same 5 contacts like a prayer wheel. Each name represented a different kind of failure. Marcus Webb, the studio head who'd helped bury the paperwork in 1995. No answer. Detective Somkai, who'd written the incident report that never mentioned Elena's name. Line disconnected. Dr. Amanda Price, the medic who'd pronounced Elena dead on arrival. Number no longer in service. One by one, the people who'd helped him erase Elena Vasquez from existence had vanished into the kind of silence that suggested they'd either died naturally or been encouraged to disappear. Wei Ming felt like a man discovering that his emergency exits had been quietly sealed shut while he slept. His fingers found the crumpled note in his jacket pocket for the 100th time. The paper felt warm from his body heat, as if it were alive. Studio 7, midnight. He'd missed the appointment by 3 hours, choosing instead to pace his hotel room like a caged animal while Sarah slept in the adjoining suite, blissfully unaware that her father was unraveling. The elevator chimed softly, and Wei Ming's head snapped up with the reflexes of a man expecting attack. But it was only a hotel employee wheeling a cart of towels, looking at him with the polite concern reserved for guests who appeared to be having nervous breakdowns in public spaces. "Can I get you anything, sir? Coffee? Water?" Wei Ming shook his head, not trusting his voice. The young man's kindness felt like salt in an open wound. When was the last time someone had looked at him without suspicion? When had he stopped being a man people wanted to help and become someone they whispered about in corners? His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Wei Ming stared at the screen for 10 seconds before finding the courage to answer. "You missed our appointment," said a voice like smoke and broken glass, speaking accented English that hadn't changed in 28 years. The phone slipped from Wei Ming's fingers, clattering against the marble floor loud enough to wake the dead, which, apparently, it had. Elena. The name came out as barely a whisper. "You remember my voice. How touching." Wei Ming retrieved the phone with hands that shook so violently he nearly dropped it again. Around him, the hotel lobby had transformed into something surreal and threatening. Shadows moved wrong, reflections didn't match their sources, and the air conditioning hummed with mechanical malevolence. "You're dead," he said, hating how the word sounded like a question. "Death is relative, Wei Ming. Some of us just learned to breathe differently." Through the phone he could hear background noise, the familiar sounds of a film set winding down, equipment being moved, crew members calling goodnight to each other. She was close, maybe in the hotel, maybe watching him right now through the floor-to-ceiling windows that suddenly felt more like a fishbowl than a sanctuary. "What do you want?" Justice feels too clean a word, revenge too simple. Elena's laugh carried 30 years of accumulated poison. "I want you to understand what you took from me, what you stole when you decided my life was worth less than your reputation." Wei Ming's eyes swept the lobby, searching for security cameras, exit routes, anything that felt like control. But this was Elena's game, played by rules he'd never understood. In 1995, she'd been a 23-year-old stunt performer with dreams bigger than her paycheck and a smile that had made Jackie Chan forget how to form complete sentences. Now she was something else entirely, a creature forged in the crucible of betrayal and impossibility. "Sarah doesn't know anything," Wei Ming said. "Leave her out of this. Your daughter is beautiful. She has your eyes, your stubborn streak." Elena's voice carried the casual affection one might use to discuss the weather. "I watched her work today. So focused, so professional, so completely unaware that her father built his career on my grave. I'll do whatever you want. Just..." "Oh, Wei Ming, you still don't understand." The line crackled with static that sounded almost like breathing. "This isn't about what you'll do. This is about what you've already done. The consequences are already in motion, have been for 30 years. The call ended with a soft click that echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. Wei Ming sat in the expensive chair, holding his silent phone, and felt the weight of his daughter sleeping upstairs, trusting him to keep her safe while having no idea that his love for her had just painted a target on her back. Elena was alive. Elena was here. And Elena had spent 3 decades planning something that Wei Ming couldn't even begin to comprehend. The marble floor beneath his feet suddenly felt as unstable as quicksand. Wei Ming sat frozen in the hotel lobby until dawn crept through the windows like an accusation, painting everything in shades of guilt. When he finally moved, his joints protested as if he'd aged a decade in those 6 hours of paralysis. The phone in his lap had gone cold and silent, but Elena's voice still echoed in his skull like tinnitus. "Some girls learn to breathe underwater." The elevator ride to Sarah's floor felt like ascending to his own execution. Each floor that passed brought him closer to the conversation he'd spent 28 years avoiding, the one where he'd have to explain why loving him had always been dangerous. The hallway stretched endlessly before him, hotel carpet muffling his footsteps like a burial shroud. He knocked on Sarah's door with the hesitation of a man disturbing the dead. "Dad?" Her voice carried sleep and confusion in equal measure. When she opened the door, her hair was mussed and her eyes still puffy, but she read his expression instantly. "What happened?" Wei Ming pushed past her into the suite, his paranoia demanding he check the bathroom, the closet, behind the curtains. Anywhere someone might be waiting. Sarah watched him with growing alarm as he moved through her space like a man expecting ambush. "Pack," he said without preamble. "Now. Everything. It's 5 in the morning." Sarah's professional calm was cracking, revealing the confusion underneath. "Dad, you're scaring me." "Good. You should be scared." Wei Ming yanked her suitcase from the closet and began throwing clothes into it with mechanical urgency. "Fear keeps people alive. Complacency kills them." Sarah caught his wrists, forcing him to stop. Her grip was surprisingly strong, When had his daughter become capable of restraining him? Tell me what's happening. All of it. No more half-truths about old tensions or production notes. Wei Ming met his daughter's eyes and saw himself reflected there. The same stubborn intelligence, the same refusal to accept surface explanations. He'd taught her to question everything, to dig beneath the obvious until she found bedrock truth. Now that training was turning against him like a weapon he'd forged for his own destruction. Elena Vasquez was a stunt performer, he began, the words dragging out of him like shrapnel. She worked on Jackie's film in 1995, the last film we shot here, in Bangkok. Sarah released his wrists but didn't step back. She'd entered full professional mode, the same focused intensity she brought to analyzing failed safety protocols or investigating on set accidents. What happened to her? She died. The lie came easier this time, polished by 3 decades of repetition. There was an accident during a night shoot, a building collapse sequence that went wrong. But Sarah's eyes were already narrowing, cataloging inconsistencies. If she died 30 years ago, who sent you that note? Wei Ming felt the careful architecture of his deceptions beginning to crumble. Each question Sarah asked revealed new structural flaws, new places where the truth bled through his carefully maintained fiction. She was too smart, too thorough, too much like him. Someone using her name, he said desperately. Someone who wants to hurt me. Why? The question was surgical in its precision. What did you do that someone would spend 30 years planning revenge? Wei Ming turned away from his daughter's gaze and found himself staring at his own reflection in the suite's window. Bangkok sprawled beyond the glass, a city of temples and traffic jams where the sacred and profane existed in uneasy proximity. Somewhere in that urban maze, Elena was waiting, planning, watching. I made choices, he said finally. Choices that seemed right at the time but were really just selfish, cowardly. What kind of choices? The memories flooded back unbidden. Elena's body broken on concrete, the decision made in seconds that had shaped decades, the paperwork that erased a human being from official existence. Jackie's face when Wei Ming explained why they couldn't call for help immediately, why certain details needed to be omitted from reports, why sometimes the greater good required smaller betrayals, the kind you don't come back from. Wei Ming's voice cracked like old leather, the kind that turn you into someone your daughter shouldn't trust. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing implications that Wei Ming prayed she couldn't fully grasp. When she spoke again, her voice carried a brittleness he'd never heard before. Are you saying you covered up her death? The question hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Wei Ming felt the weight of truth pressing against his chest, demanding release after 3 decades of imprisonment. But confession meant losing Sarah forever, watching love turn to disgust in her eyes, destroying the one pure thing his corrupted hands had ever touched. I'm saying some stories don't have heroes, he whispered. Only people who make terrible choices and spend the rest of their lives paying for them. Outside, Bangkok was waking up, traffic beginning to hum, street vendors setting up their stalls, the city preparing for another day of beautiful chaos. But in the hotel room, time felt suspended, balanced on the knife's edge of revelation. Sarah stared at her father as if seeing him for the first time, and Wei Ming watched 28 years of trust begin to fracture like safety glass under pressure. Sarah's expressions cycled through disbelief, hurt, and something colder than either. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the careful distance of someone reassessing everything they thought they knew. You covered up a woman's death. Not a question this time. A statement heavy with the weight of understanding. You let her family think, what, that she disappeared? That she abandoned them? Wei Ming couldn't meet her eyes. It was complicated. The studio was worried about liability, the local authorities wanted it handled quietly, and Jackie. He stopped, realizing how pathetic his justifications sounded when stripped of their careful packaging. And Jackie what? Sarah's voice had gone deadly quiet. Don't you dare tell me Jackie Chan was part of covering up someone's death. He was devastated, broken. Elena was... They were... Wei Ming fumbled for words that could convey the depth of what Jackie had lost without revealing. How little Wei Ming had cared about anything except damage control. Sarah stepped back as if he'd struck her. They were what, Dad? In love? And you helped bury her so thoroughly that he couldn't even grieve properly. The accuracy of her assessment was like a scalpel finding the exact location of an old wound. Wei Ming watched his daughter's face transform as 30 years of careful mythology crumbled. Every story he'd told her about his career, every principle he'd claimed to live by, every reason she'd had to respect him, all of it recontextualizing itself in the harsh light of truth. "I need you to understand," Wei Ming said desperately. "I was trying to protect everyone. The studio, Jackie's career, the other crew members who might have faced charges. Everyone except Elena." Sarah's interruption cut through his words like wire through flesh. "Everyone except the woman whose life you erased because it was inconvenient." Wei Ming felt something fundamental shifting between them, a tectonic movement that would reshape their relationship forever. The daughter who had looked at him with pride and affection was disappearing, replaced by someone who saw him clearly for the first time. "You want to know the worst part?" Sarah's laugh held no humor. "I spent my entire life trying to live up to your standards, your integrity, your commitment to safety and protecting people." She gestured at the suitcase he'd been packing with manic urgency. "All while you were covering up the fact that someone died on your watch and you chose your career over her life." The words hit Wei Ming like physical blows, each one true and therefore unforgivable. He'd built his reputation on the foundation of Elena's silence, constructed his entire identity around principles he'd betrayed before Sarah was even born. The man she'd admired existed only as long as she didn't know what he'd done to become him. "Sarah, please." She held up a hand, and Wei Ming saw his own gesture reflected back at him, the same authoritative motion he used to stop dangerous stunts mid-sequence. Don't try to explain or justify or make me complicit in whatever story you've been telling yourself for 30 years. Wei Ming's phone buzzed against his chest. He ignored it, but Sarah's eyes tracked the sound with the hypervigilance of someone who'd just learned that everything familiar might be dangerous. "That's her, isn't it?" Sarah's voice carried a strange mixture of fear and fascination. "Elena, the woman you killed." "I didn't kill her," Wei Ming protested automatically. "The accident—" "But you killed her afterward." Sarah's insight was surgical in its precision. Maybe not her body, but everything else. Her name, her story, her right to be remembered. "You killed her as thoroughly as if you'd put a gun to her head." The phone buzzed again, insistent. This time Sarah reached for it before Wei Ming could react, her movements quick and decisive. He grabbed for the device, but his daughter was younger, faster, and motivated by 28 years of accumulated trust that had just curdled into rage. "Don't answer that," Wei Ming pleaded, but Sarah was already swiping the screen. "This is Sarah Chen," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos of revelations swirling around them. Wei Ming watched his daughter's face as Elena's voice emerged from the speaker, too distant for him to make out words but close enough to see their effect. Sarah's expression shifted from defiance to confusion to something that looked almost like sympathy. "Yes," Sarah said quietly into the phone. "I understand now." She ended the call and looked at Wei Ming with eyes that held no trace of the love that had sustained him for nearly 3 decades. In its place was something worse than hatred, disappointment so profound it seemed to physically diminish him. "She's not dead, Dad." Sarah's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Elena Vasquez is alive, and after talking to her for 30 seconds, I think I understand her better than I've ever understood you." Wei Ming felt the last of his carefully constructed world collapse into rubble around his feet. The hotel room felt like a tomb after Sarah's words settled between them. Wei Ming stood frozen, watching his daughter transform before his eyes, the loving, trusting woman who'd called him her hero disappearing like morning mist, replaced by someone who looked at him as if he were a stranger wearing her father's face. "She's been alive for 30 years. Sarah's voice carried the hollow quality of someone processing the impossible. 30 years, Dad. While you built your career on her grave, her metaphorical grave, she's been, what, hiding, planning, suffering?" Wei Ming opened his mouth but found no words that could bridge the chasm that had opened between them. How could he explain that Elena's survival was somehow more terrifying than her death? That the woman who died in that Bangkok alley had been reborn as something far more dangerous? Someone with unlimited time to perfect her revenge? "What did she say to you?" he finally managed. Sarah's laugh held no warmth. She said she's been watching me grow up, watching me follow in your footsteps, learning your craft, admiring your principles. Her voice cracked slightly. She said it broke her heart to see how proud I was of you. Each word was a knife thrust, precise and devastating. Wei Ming felt something fundamental tearing inside him. Not just his relationship with Sarah, but his understanding of himself. For 30 years he'd managed to compartmentalize his guilt, to convince himself that the choices he'd made were complex rather than simply wrong. But seeing himself reflected in Sarah's eyes, seeing the man she now knew him to be, stripped away every comfortable rationalization. She also said, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength, that she never intended to hurt me, that her issue is with you and the people who helped bury her, but that I deserve to know who my father really is. Wei Ming sank into the suite's chair, feeling every one of his 58 years settle into his bones like lead. Sarah, Stop. Sarah moved to the window, putting distance between them as if his proximity had become toxic. I need to think. I need to process the fact that everything I believed about you, about our family, about my own career, it's all built on a lie. Outside, Bangkok pulsed with morning life, but the hotel room felt suspended in its own terrible bubble of revelation. Wei Ming watched his daughter's reflection in the glass and saw her struggling with questions that had no good answers. How do you love someone who's capable of such betrayal? How do you trust your own judgment when it's failed you so completely? She wants to meet, Sarah said suddenly. Elena. She wants to meet with both of us, tonight. Wei Ming's blood went cold. No, absolutely not. Whatever she's planning, what could she possibly do to us that's worse than what you've already done? Sarah turned from the window, and Wei Ming was shocked by the steel in her voice. You've destroyed our relationship. You've made me question everything I thought I knew about right and wrong. You've turned my career into a monument to your cowardice. The words hit like hammer blows, each one true and therefore unforgivable. Wei Ming had spent decades crafting the perfect life, respected career, loving daughter, legacy built on apparent integrity. Now he watched it crumble in real time, each piece of debris revealing more damage underneath. She could kill you, he said desperately. Sarah, you don't understand. Someone who spent 30 years planning revenge isn't stable, isn't safe. Neither are fathers who cover up deaths, Sarah shot back. At least Elena's motivations make sense. She was wronged and wants justice. What's your excuse? Wei Ming felt his carefully constructed defenses finally collapse completely. The weight of 30 years' worth of suppressed guilt crashed down on him like a building coming apart. And for the first time since that night in 1995, he stopped trying to justify his choices. I was scared, he whispered, terrified. My career was everything to me, and when Elena fell, when I saw her body... He stopped, realizing how inadequate the words were. I panicked, made decisions in seconds that I've regretted for decades. But not enough to come forward, not enough to tell the truth. No, the admission felt like bleeding out, not enough for that. Sarah studied him with the clinical detachment of someone examining a particularly unpleasant specimen. Do you know what the worst part is? I would have forgiven you. If you'd told me years ago, if you'd shown even a shred of remorse or accountability, I might have understood. But you let me worship a lie. You let me pattern my entire life after principles you don't actually possess. Wei Ming felt tears threatening for the first time in decades, not tears of self-pity, but of genuine grief for what he'd lost. Not just Sarah's love, but his own sense of self. The man he'd pretended to be was dying, and the man underneath was someone he barely recognized. We're meeting her tonight, Sarah said with finality. I need to hear her story, the real story. And you're going to sit there and listen to what your cowardice cost. The decision settled between them like a death sentence, and Wei Ming realized that whatever Elena had planned, it had already succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. The abandoned studio lot stretched before them like a graveyard of dreams, empty sound stages rising against the Bangkok twilight like monuments to forgotten stories. Wei Ming's hands trembled as he followed Sarah through the maze of deteriorating buildings, each step carrying him deeper into a past he'd spent 30 years trying to escape. "She chose this place deliberately," Sarah said, her voice echoing off concrete walls marked with decades of weather and neglect. The same studio where it happened. Wei Ming recognized the layout despite the decay, Stage 7 looming ahead, its massive doors hanging open like a mouth ready to swallow them whole. Inside, work lights had been arranged in a perfect recreation of that night in 1995, throwing harsh shadows across equipment that looked disturbingly familiar. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to resurrect the exact conditions of Elena's supposed death. "Chen Wei Ming," the voice came from the shadows beyond the lights, cultured and controlled despite carrying the weight of 3 decades worth of carefully nurtured rage. Elena Vasquez stepped into the illuminated circle, and Wei Ming felt his breath catch. She was beautiful still, but in the way that broken glass could be beautiful. Sharp edges and fractured light creating something both compelling and dangerous. The years had marked her, but not with ordinary aging. This was someone who had been systematically reconstructing herself, piece by piece, into a perfect instrument of reckoning. "You look older," Elena observed with clinical detachment. "Good. I wanted you to have time to build something worth destroying." Sarah moved forward slightly, placing herself between her father and this woman who had haunted their family for longer than she'd been alive. "Elena, I'm sorry for what happened to you. What my father did—" "Your father didn't do anything to me, Sarah." Elena's smile was gentle when she looked at Wei Ming's daughter, but it hardened to obsidian when it shifted to him. "That's the beautiful irony of this entire situation. Chen Wei Ming spent 30 years believing he'd helped cover up my death, building his guilt and paranoia around an act of cowardice that was ultimately unnecessary." Wei Ming felt the ground shifting beneath him, reality reconfiguring itself around Elena's words. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're an even bigger coward than you think." Elena moved closer, her presence filling the space like poison gas. "That night, when I fell, when you saw me lying there, I wasn't dead, wasn't even dying. Broken ribs, concussion, internal bleeding that looked worse than it was." The revelation hit Wei Ming like a physical blow. He'd built his entire identity around the weight of Elena's death, crafted his guilt and self-hatred around the belief that his cowardice had buried an innocent woman. But if she'd survived— "You saw what you expected to see," Elena continued, circling them now like a predator savoring the moment before the kill. "A dead stunt performer, another casualty of your negligent planning. And instead of checking for a pulse, instead of calling for medical help immediately, you went into damage control mode." Sarah was staring at her father with something approaching horror. "Dad, tell me you checked. Tell me you made sure she was actually—" "He didn't." Elena's voice carried the satisfaction of someone finally revealing a perfectly crafted truth. Chen Wei Ming was so concerned with protecting his reputation that he never bothered to confirm whether I was actually dead before he started planning my burial. Wei Ming's legs gave out, sending him crashing into a nearby chair with an impact that seemed to echo through the cavernous space. 30 years of guilt, 30 years of carefully managed self-hatred, and it had all been built on the foundation of an assumption he'd never bothered to verify. "So I lay there," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "listening to you and the studio executives discuss how to handle my death. Listening to you convince Jackie that calling the authorities immediately would complicate things. Listening to you decide that Elena Vasquez was more valuable as a non-person than as an inconvenient witness. Then why didn't you—" Wei Ming started, but Elena cut him off with a gesture that was pure theatrical command. "Speak up? Announce my survival?" She laughed, and the sound was like breaking crystal. "Because in that moment, listening to you erase me so efficiently, I realized something wonderful. I realized that Elena Vasquez really was dead. The naive young woman who trusted people like you, who believed that competence and reputation meant integrity. She died on that concrete floor." Elena spread her arms wide, embracing the recreation of her own destruction. What survived was something much more useful. Someone with nothing left to lose and unlimited time to plan the perfect revenge. Sarah stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "What do you want? From him? From us?" Elena's smile was radiant and terrible. I want him to feel what I felt for 30 years. Erased, forgotten, watching helplessly as everything he built crumbles away. She looked directly at Wei Ming, her eyes holding depths of patient fury that made him understand exactly how small and pathetic his guilt had always been. I want Chen Wei Ming to disappear the way he made me disappear, completely and forever. The silence that followed Elena's declaration stretched like a wire about to snap. Wei Ming found himself staring at this woman who had shaped his entire adult life without his knowledge, realizing that his guilt, the foundation upon which he'd built everything, had been as much a performance as any stunt he'd ever coordinated. "You won't need to destroy him," Sarah said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension with surgical precision. "He's already gone." Elena's head tilted, genuinely curious for the first time since they'd arrived. "Look at him," Sarah continued, gesturing toward her father without taking her eyes off Elena. "Really look. This isn't a man who needs to be torn down. This is someone who's been hollowing himself out for 30 years, piece by piece. You've already won." Wei Ming felt the truth of his daughter's words settle into his bones. The man who had made those choices in 1995, young, ambitious, terrified of losing everything, had indeed disappeared, replaced by someone who'd spent 3 decades in elaborate penance for sins he'd never fully understood. "I've been dead longer than you have," he whispered, and the admission felt like exhaling poison. Every day for 30 years, making decisions based on guilt for something I was too cowardice to even verify. Building safety protocols to prevent deaths I wasn't even responsible for. Teaching principles I'd never actually tested. Elena's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the perfect mask of vengeance showing its first crack. "Dad," Sarah said, her voice softer now, though still carrying the weight of everything broken between them. "What happened to Jackie? When you told him I was dead?" The question was directed at Elena, but it was Wei Ming who answered, the memory surfacing with crystalline clarity. "He grieved for 3 months, couldn't work, couldn't sleep. I watched him blame himself for not being there to catch you, for not insisting on better safety measures." Wei Ming's voice cracked. "I watched the man who loved you destroy himself with guilt that should have been mine. And you never told him," Elena said. "It wasn't a question. How could I? By the time I understood what I'd done, the lie had grown too large. Jackie had moved on, built new relationships on the foundation of losing you. Everyone had. Telling the truth would have destroyed more than just me." Elena moved closer to the recreated stunt setup, her fingers trailing over the rigging that had been arranged to mirror that night so precisely. "Do you know what I did for the first 5 years I waited? I kept thinking someone would look for me, that eventually the guilt would drive one of you to investigate, to discover that Elena Vasquez had never actually died. But no one came," Sarah said, understanding dawning in her voice. "No one came," Elena confirmed. "So I realized that Elena Vasquez really was dead. The industry had buried her so completely that she'd never existed at all. Birth certificate, work history, relationships, all of it erased not by conspiracy but by simple indifference." She turned back to Wei Ming, and he was surprised to see something almost like exhaustion in her eyes. "Do you understand how much energy it takes to sustain 30 years of hatred? How much planning, how much careful orchestration? I've spent longer preparing this revenge than you spent feeling guilty about it." Wei Ming stood slowly, his legs unsteady but his voice gaining strength. "So what now? You've destroyed my relationship with Sarah, exposed everything I've built as a lie. You've proven that I'm exactly the coward we both knew I was. What's left?" Elena studied him for a long moment, and Wei Ming saw her really looking at him, not at the target of her vengeance, but at the broken man who'd been carrying her ghost for 3 decades. "I thought it would feel different," she said quietly. "I thought when you finally understood what you'd taken from me, when your world collapsed the way mine did, I would feel satisfied, complete. But you don't," Sarah observed, her filmmaker's eye catching the subtle deflation in Elena's posture. "I don't." Elena's admission carried the weight of 30 years' worth of purpose, suddenly rendered meaningless. Because destroying Chen Wei-ming doesn't bring back Elena Vasquez. It just creates two people who never got to exist. The Bangkok night pressed against the studio walls, carrying the sounds of a city that had moved on while they'd remained trapped in 1995. Wei-ming felt something shifting inside him. Not redemption, because some things couldn't be redeemed, but perhaps the possibility of moving forward without the weight of imagined sins. "I can't give you your life back," he said to Elena, "and I can't undo what I stole from you. But I can stop stealing from myself." Elena nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like a baton being passed from one exhausted runner to another. For the first time in 30 years, Chen Wei-ming began to disappear in the way that mattered most. Not through destruction, but through the simple act of letting go.